based on water year 23-24 when water year 24-25 has already passed? Because, I mean, how do you know who has carryover or not?
The time period to submit a transfer request is with, why we made it the end of the month is because at that point in time, we expect to have the current water year information and that we can act upon. All right, so the way we envision it is when a user is doing their end of year reporting, they will realize that they're in a situation where they would need that allocation transfer and initiate the transfer process at that point in time.
But how do they
Because they
know?
won't know either until depending on how they keep records, but if the reporting is not required until the end, so they may not know until the end of the water year if they're in an overuse status or not.
But from the user's perspective, who's going to go and try and find people to transfer with, they don't know who actually has carryover, who would be willing to transfer, because they're working on, you know, really 2 years old information. So just a suggestion.
Oh, yeah, please.
So this is also for the record. Farika Sege, agents and staff. The problem comes in when staff has to comply with the judgment. The judgment has certain deadlines by which certain actions have to be done. So in order to prepare the annual report, this transfer process is part of the annual accounting, which goes into the annual report. And so we need time for us to be able to collect the data, which we collect the end of the water year, which is September 30. So we can only start getting that information October 1st when we send it out, when we send out the extraction and use reporting, which is what we did this year. We're spot on the timing for that. However, if we extend that deadline for people to submit the extraction and use reporting, we don't have enough time to analyze the data and compile it and then make it part of the annual report, which is supposed to go to the PAC and TAC for review as a complete packet. So that's the reason why it's because of the inflexibility of the dates that are there. It's the same problem that we identified, and I think it really just puts so much of a strain, and that's why we cannot tell people who has carryover or not, because we don't have that data at that point in time. We need to first analyze, get that data first, analyze that data, and as you can see from what John pointed out in that table, about 65% of the people have not yet started responding to that. So it really gives us so much of a time crunch to try and get everything else ready. That report is due to DWR by April 1st, and to the court as well by April 1st. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, he articulated it better than I. That's what I was saying about the timelines required to receive all the inputs, to compile it into a report, to do the PAC and TAC processes and still meet the deadlines imposed by both the judgment and by DWR. We don't have a whole lot of time to work with that. We're kind of, the deadlines imposed upon us impinge our ability to extend the time period for the requests. Yeah.
I have a comment. I would like to say thank you very much to John Demers for, I've had constituents contacting me in regards to water transfers, especially when they're out of the water transfer area and need water, and trying to understand all of that process. So I do want to say thank you. I think that you will get more first, as we're first going through this, than later. And so I do think that that is part of our job, to get that done and to make sense. So staff walking through this process as it is new. And I would like to ask this board, as this is new and judgment and whatever, I think we do need to be making sure the PAC and the TAC are looking at the processes that we have in place and how do we improve them. Similar to what I just heard, yes, we have court dates and we have judicial dates and state dates, whatever, but we're ultimately here to work together. And so I'd like to also push back and on all parties to figure out how do we make sure that those water transfers happen and that people do have water, instead of just, no, sorry, it's a deadline. That's not, telling me no is not the best thing to say. So I think there's a workaround some way, one way or another. So I just want to put that in place, so that you understand where I'm coming from on these things when I ask certain people to look into stuff. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, to Director Long's, Director Long's point, I'm wondering if we need to generate either a series of slides, videos, some education process that goes out, that can be sent to every address we have on board. Obviously, the pack and tack will get it, but every address on board that gives them this timeline and why this timeline is significant. And to me, we've heard that today. We're fighting a state mandate, and that state mandate requires that we have to submit by a certain date. It requires that we have things in by a certain date. And I think, and to Director Long's point, I think it is something that we're going to have to address, and I'm proposing that we address it by addressing it from an education standpoint. And so that people understand these are not out of the blue issues that we're dealing with. We're on strict timelines, and they have to be on a strict timeline to make this system work. And maybe we need to educate. So I throw that out as I think we can do this in a proactive stand, and we have the tools to do it. We have the addresses. We have the capability. The slides that you produce that we get here, you could add some dialogue to it and make it available so people see it. I don't know which the answer is, but I think we need to educate better than we're doing.
Anyone else? With that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Unless someone has a question or a comment or a change to make, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, which is items 9 through 12 inclusive.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion's carried. We'll at this time recess the general session into closed session to return as soon as possible.
Gene, given the fact that we've got a lot of folks in the audience, is it possible to put the closed session at the end? No.
No, yours is on. When it's red up top, that means it's on.
Session to general session, we'll call item number 14 on the calendar. And at this time, I'm going to make a motion to remove item 14 from the calendar. We have received letters from constituents and the board's concerned that those letters express very legitimate concerns that need further work. And so I am making the motion, asking the board for their concurrence to delete agenda item 14 from the agenda in order that staff, United, PV, and any other interested parties can get together soon in order to work through the issues presented in that ordinance. The agency does have some deadlines to deal with relative to the Court of Appeals, so if the interested parties could accelerate the efforts to get this resolved, it would be much appreciated. And then hopefully, once that collaboration is complete, something else will come back before the board. So with that, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. How about a roll call?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes. All right, let's move on then to item number 15.
Okay, that looks good now. Okay, this is item number 15. Oh, good afternoon. Again, John Demers, the Executive Officer for Fox Canyon for the agency. This is item number 15, a framework for the review and processing of variance requests. This was brought following a subcommittee meeting. So the background, back in 2019, the agency adopted a new allocation system for Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins that was intended to transition from our previous systems. We had an efficiency system, we had an irrigation allowance system, but we were moving away from those, providing a sustainable system as mandated by Sigma that essentially would cap extractions at a predetermined level. But within that ordinance, we established in Article 11 a process for owners or operators to request a variance from that originally determined allocation. Subsequent to that, resolution number 2020-03 has a very long title, as seen on the slide, was established and adopted by the board in April 2020, which created a variance review committee, provided additional guidance for that committee and for staff, and then appointed 7 members to that variance review committee back in 2020. So discussion after those two documents were approved and published, the agency received somewhere over 150 variance requests, and we're, in simple terms, overwhelmed. The criteria, although seemed to be fairly specific in the written documentation, it proved to be unworkable. And it was burdensome for the agency staff to obtain the necessary research and for the variance review committee to review and evaluate the requests. And we're actually only to complete only a tiny fraction of the request. They found they could only complete about one request per committee meeting, hour-long or hour-plus meeting. They would get through maybe one. So the agency staff, and this was with adjudications, with various other things going on, the significant ramp up in our workload, simultaneous with a decrease in the available staff, began to work slower and slower on these to the point we weren't working, and the VRC stopped meeting. So we were left with a sizable backlog of variance requests that had not been addressed or dealt with. Based upon the work of the ad hoc subcommittee on variances about a month ago now, staff was directed to review what was in the backlog and to come up with some determinations and to present it to the full board, which is what we're doing now. And that review revealed that there were some major categories of the requests. One of the ones that I wanted to highlight was there was a significant number, I think the total was 38 in total, which alleged that there was an insufficient supply from either Pleasant Valley County and or United Water for supplemental water. When you sum the requested increases to allocation allowance, it came to in excess of 9,000 acre feet. And I think the importance of that will be highlighted later on. A separate category that we had was municipal agencies. There were 23 requests that came from municipal agencies, which really allege very special circumstances, and I think those are a category unto themselves. But most of them involved what would be called a correction. We didn't report this year because of our well was inoperable, that field was fallowed, we were growing dry beans that year, we were doing something that shows that the historical period of use that was used to determine that initial allocation is faulty in some way and needs to be corrected. So when we're looking at these, as a public agency, we have to apply a lot of rigor and expertise, but the most important aspect is that we are fair and consistent in how we review these. So I did some research. There's nothing out there that shows how a groundwater sustainability or management agency reviews variance standards, but I did do some research, and there are other public agencies that review other types of variances, such as a zoning variance, an air quality variance, but in general, a variance from a written policy. And from that, I kind of boiled down to some general rules of how those are reviewed, which are there on the slide. It can be seen, right, which involves verifiable facts, a unique and unreasonably burdensome situation, and a situation that was not created by the requester. The concept of minimal impact, which means that the variance that we grant is the smallest that we can grant that will solve the problem. And it must not confer a special privilege that is inconsistent with conditions placed upon comparable situations, and this goes back to the first bullet on the slide. We must be fair and we must be consistent. And also, we have to subject to a risk assessment process. And if there's not a high likelihood that the control is placed upon the situation will alleviate the risk, then it would be prudent for us not to approve. And what I mean by that is, for example, an operator says, well, in case I don't get water from the PTP, I want an allocation to be able to pump that same amount of water. Well, if we give them the allocation, what's to stop them from pumping it anyway? We have no means or controls or anything to control that. And that would be, in my assessment, something that would violate a prudent risk approach to that. We're inducing a situation where we have no control over it. So I think based upon these general set of factors, if the staff applies them consistently and fairly, we could resume the evaluation of the pending requests, but with a little bit clearer and tighter guidelines, and therefore have some more certain outcomes, rather than endless discussion at a variance review committee or endless back and forth email requests for bits of information that may have not been included in the original application. So the second bullet point here, it says, in general, the requests that we have for, I either I'm not getting or I might not get water from PV, or I might not get water through the PTP. I think the agency cannot move forward on those because of the sheer volume. If we're going to be fair and consistent and approve one, then we would need to essentially approve anybody in that category that asked. And the people that have asked so far comes to over 9,000 acre feet. And in PV, there are ongoing discussions about what the exact yield is, but 9,000 acre feet, I don't think meets anybody's definition of what would be sustainable to add to the allocation within PV. So I don't think we can go down the route unless there's something very unique or very special about that variance request. That entire category needs to be denied. For the municipal agencies, those have to be worked case by case, and we need to work in collaboration with the agency that requested to arrive at a mutually agreeable situation that's fair, that's equitable, and that supports our basin management needs. But there's no general rule or guidance that I think we can apply. I think because they're municipal agencies, it's a unique situation. And everything else that shakes out, again, we have the guidelines that I presented. Are they unique? Are we looking at minimal impact? Are we looking at the application of special privilege? Are we doing a risk assessment? As we evaluate them, we kind of checklist or a flow chart type approach for those factors, and then we approve them or deny them based upon our review. And then we've also concluded that the Variance Review Committee is redundant to this effort. I think they would follow essentially the same approach. So we don't feel that it would be in our best interest for efficiency or effectiveness to reinstate that process, which yields my recommendations. So my ask is that your board approves the framework as I presented in the general guidelines, that we rescind the resolution 2020-03, not here today. We would bring it to the board at a later date for a formal action, but you direct us to prepare that. And that would disestablish the Variance Review Committee. Then to direct staff to evaluate the need to create a new resolution to codify approval processes, and if we deem that necessary, to replace other elements that may be contained within 2020-03 that we want to keep. And then finally, that staff begins to work on a flexible allocation system for extractors. And what I mean by that is, again, if somebody's onto the PTP and they're getting water from PTP and they're not pumping, and for whatever reason, water's not available in PTP, right? It's the Santa Clara River, it's a dry year, there's nothing coming down the Santa Clara River, the PTP pumps, maybe one's out of commission, they're not delivering water. Well, we would allow some sort of flexible transfer that during those time periods where we could verify that private well gets an increased extraction allocation, and PTP takes a commensurate reduction. So, so that the grower, the operator, can use water on a flexible basis, not a permanent increase, not extending past that period where there's an issue with, again, for example, the PTP. And subject to your questions, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, John. I guess first comment, I appreciate the presentation and how consistent it is with our discussions at the variance ad hoc. I, for lots of different reasons, endorse the suggestion that it's time to disestablish the Variance Review Committee. It was a laborious, proved to be unsuccessful process, and the emphasis now is getting these decided finally and fairly. And I think with the outline that you've provided, that's something that you and staff can accomplish. So thank you. Any other comments from the board before we open it to the public?
I agree with the recommendations, and I agree that this issue is a complicated issue. What we were doing was not working, and I think we're big enough to figure out a new system recognizing that we may have to make modifications in the middle of it to somehow make this process work. And we can't stretch it out forever. So I support this protocol until we find out that we need to tweak it. And when that comes, bring it before the board and the public, and we'll make adjustments going forward.
All right. With that, any questions or comments from the public on this item?
Yeah, it's on.
Afternoon, Chair West, members of the board. Wanted to thank John for bringing this
You're
forward.
going to have to bend way down if you want to use that mic.
Hi.
Yeah, why don't you stand?
Try that.
Thank John for bringing this forward and congratulate the agency on having John here. I think this is a demonstration of the thoughtfulness I think John's going to bring to the agency. My name is Jared Bouchard, General Manager for Pleasant Valley County Water District. The first thing I really want to thank him for is the disbanding of the Variance Review Committee. I got to sit on that for a while, and that was a painful process, so thank you. The other is the really important point that John brought up there that we've been asking for since the allocation came forward that will really help us, the operators, as the transfer situation that needs to be able to occur. And I'd ask that the board support that, significant support, and that we get both all of the operators and the agencies that are going to be involved in that engaged, because we need to find a really simple administrative process and accounting process for it to happen, and it needs to be flexible and be able to happen on the move. We don't know when operator X's well may fail and they need to gather additional water from the purveyor, as in PV or United, and then being able to transfer allocation from their well to us, or vice versa. But it needs to be a very quick administrative process with an easy accounting for it to function as it needs to. So we just want to rise in support of that, and thank you, John.
Thank you, Jared. Anyone else? All right, returning back to the board. Again, I like the protocol that you've laid out, John. I'd like you to expedite that process. I guess any other direction or comments from the board? We do have another variance ad hoc meeting set up for mid-November. I think it's the 13th. And the last meeting was well-attended, and there was some really constructive community input. I'd like to see that continue, and I'm looking forward to the next report at that committee meeting. All
So
right.
do you need a motion for staff recommendation, or?
We do now. We're just giving staff direction, that's all.
Okay.
All right, let's move on then to item number 16.
Good afternoon, Jason Kanger, Agency Counsel. This is a reoccurring item related to an ordinance that would authorize the compensation of your board, as well as potentially the reimbursement of actual and necessary expenses. The previous item regarding compensating your board outlined the process. I'm going to quickly review that, but I do need a couple points of direction from your board. So just by way of recap, the GMA directors have never been compensated for services provided on behalf of the agency. The GMA Act neither authorizes nor prohibits compensation of directors. However, a separate provision in the Water Code authorizes the compensation of water district boards of directors, and that includes water districts that provide groundwater management services, such as the GMA. If your board does decide to move forward with authorizing the reimbursement of actual and necessary expenses, a separate policy will need to be enacted. So the authorization to compensate must be approved in an ordinance. The statute that allows compensation authorizes compensation for attendance. So that's what we're talking about here. Attendance, compensation for attendance on behalf of the agency. The statute authorizes a total of up to 10 days per month of compensation for your board. The initial compensation can be set at $100 per day of attendance, which was the limit that your board had indicated a preference for. However, I'm sorry, compensation can be increased annually with the adoption of a second ordinance, and only approximately 5% of what was the originally authorized compensation. And so if you do the math, that's about $5 per year. So if you chose to increase it next year, it would be 105.
Jason, Elka, can you put the slides up so the audience can see it?
I'm sorry.
There we go. There we go. Thank you.
And as I said before, adoption of a separate companion policy must be adopted in order to authorize certain additional types of meetings that would be approved for compensation, but also for the reimbursement of actual and necessary expenses. So we're going to get into some of these things and the requirements that are still needed. So the statute that authorizes compensation authorizes the following types of committees, or authorizes compensation for your board's attendance at the following types of meetings: GMA board meetings, GMA advisory committee meetings, LPV Watermaster Stakeholder Advisory Committee meetings, the PAC and the TAC, certain ethics trainings, and other meetings as directed by your board. And those other meetings would be included in the separately adopted policy. So as I just said, a separate policy must be approved to compensate for additional types of meetings as well as for actual and necessary expenses. The statute authorizes reimbursement of the following types of actual necessary expenses. They're pretty common: travel, meals, lodging, and other expenses related to the meetings that otherwise would be, for which compensation would be paid. The statute that authorizes the reimbursement of actual and necessary expenses allows your board to set rates of compensation. In the absence of setting rates, the default is the U.S. Internal Revenue's reimbursement rates for meals, lodging, and travel. Expenses not covered by the ordinance or that fit within the ordinance or the policy would be the responsibility of individual members. So for example, if an actual and necessary expense that you submit for reimbursement is not part of the covered policy, you would be required to cover it yourself. So on to the couple requirements, and I consider these threshold requirements for your consideration. The requirement, or if your board decides to compensate or reimburse itself, then your board is required by statute to complete at least 2 hours of general ethics, of training in general ethics principles and ethics every 2 years. Similarly, if your board decides to authorize reimbursement of expenses, then you will have to submit expense reports that detail the expenses so that staff can compare them against the policy to see what qualifies and what not. These are kind of threshold requirements. So let me just stop for a moment. It's one of the requested directions. Are you guys okay with that? Having to attend ethics trainings for 2 hours every 2 years? It's not a
Right
big
now,
commitment.
4 of the 5 of us have to do that anyway.
And that would qualify you, sorry, that would qualify you for this particular
So
one.
the question should be to Director Graviano, since he's the only one that this would be new for. Oh, you have to, so we're already compliant.
No, okay.
Never thought of that.
And then I imagine the expense report requirement isn't too big of a. So, on to the points of needed direction here. The types of meetings I said are GMA meetings, GMA committee or advisory committee meetings, the LPV stakeholder advisory meetings, certain ethics trainings that you guys will apparently attend, and meetings of the Water Issues Committee of the Association of Water Agencies of Ventura County. I included that one in the policy because you guys expressed interest in it at the last meeting, that being one of the compensable meetings. Are there others?
There are. We
Okay.
talked earlier about, this refers to standing committees, but there are appointed ad hoc committees at time that meet with staff and the public in order to generate some policy ideas to bring back to the board. I guess they're an advisory committee, but they're not a standing committee.
Correct.
They're by their nature ad hoc. So just taking standing committees and I guess advisory committees would be fine.
Are you talking about the executive committee?
No, that's a standing committee.
That's a
But apart from that, we from time to time have ad hoc committees like the variance ad hoc. It's not a standing committee. It was for a limited term, a limited purpose, holding public meetings. And that would qualify, it would seem to me as well.
Well, you get to decide, is what I'm
Okay.
saying. So is it any ad hoc meeting of the GMA?
I guess, yeah, meetings of an appointed ad hoc committee. So it just can't be two of us meeting in the hallway, but if there's an appointed ad hoc committee and you're attending a noticed meeting, because we do notice those meetings. Another one that it seems to me, and this happened 3 times in the last year, there are meetings that fall outside these categories that, there were actually 4 times last year, I was asked to meet with various state legislators concerning legislation that was pertinent to the GMA's business. And 3 of those occasions required me to go to Sacramento to meet with them. One of them I was able to meet with here. I think if a board member is being asked to make those sort of meetings at the request of the GMA, those should be qualified for compensation as well.
Do you want to?
How you phrase that, and whether maybe those are just meetings, special meetings authorized by the executive officer, that'd be fine.
Or I think it's the whole board per statute. Are you guys comfortable with that? As
Comfortable
opposed to
with-
just the chair or the executive, or I think it should be
Any board member attending a special meeting as approved by the executive officer.
at the request of the, okay, cool.
Yeah, I think the clarification there is per the request of the executive director.
There are, the Association of Water Agencies of Ventura County was created 40 years ago or so, 30 years ago, and has done a great job of building rapport, building networks, engaging with other agencies for our common benefit. And I'm not sure the Water Issues Committee covers all of those bases. For example, the annual, it's been going on for a bunch of years, the annual Association of Water Agencies meeting we do it, I think, at the, no, well, we do it at one at the Reagan Library, and the other one we do at the Courtyard. I think those are really good areas for members to engage with other water agencies and other individuals and build relationships. And I think building relationships is key to one of the ways of solving our collective problems. So I think that particular line, I'm not sure I'm covering all of it, but I think that needs to be a broader category and not just Water Issues Committee. I find some of those other ones are actually more valuable than the monthly Water Issues Committee.
Tony?
Yeah, I think, Lynn, what you're referring to is that annual symposium.
Yes,
The
the same,
AWA
yes.
annual symposium. And I would agree with that. Just a question, Jason, FCGMA Standing Advisory Committee. So just to be clear, that wouldn't be any of the standing committees like exec or fiscal or operations, correct?
Correct, that's how I interpret it.
That's how you interpret, okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm ready to go through the rest of this if you want, and just sort of trot out on the limb, since I'm the one who's to blame for bringing this whole thing up in the first place. But in terms of reimbursement of expenses, you asked in the staff report whether other expenses should be authorized, other than.
Correct.
My answer would be no. You would have expenses for travel or meals or lodging related to covered meetings. The question I think that was out there, which I don't know that was addressed, is whether or not there needed to be prior board approval, for example, to go to a conference.
We can do it both ways. We can authorize it now, and we can also include kind of a catch-all that says something like, any other meetings as directed or at the request of the board or as approved by the board
In advance.
in advance.
Is that real? I don't know if it's really efficient to have every off-chart meeting. I think it would be sufficient to have it with the approval of the executive officer. And, because we see those reports every month, what the expenses are, so.
And I agree with that. I just was trying to set up the dominoes so that there's some clarity. I don't think you need to do it in advance. Expense reports required, yes, I would say yes. Do them within 30 days.
Is everybody else comfortable with 30 days?
That'd be my response. And then the required, willing to commit to the ethics training, well, all 5 of us already do it anyway. And I think that gets you all of your open items.
Let me just double check. Review of the ordinance, it's not necessary. The reason I included it was because we just did the GEMS fee when I was preparing this, and the GEMS fee has that like, hey, let's check it out for every 5 years. Do you guys want to revisit this policy every so often, or it's not required?
My view is you can revisit it at such time as a member or two or director or two wants to revisit it, but other than that, I don't think it needs to happen.
Sounds good.
I'm continuing
Expense
to go out
reports,
on my
rates for,
limb here.
do you
Just
guys want
cut it
to
off
change,
behind me.
are you guys comfortable using the IRS rates of reimbursement?
Yes.
Yeah, there doesn't need to be another schematic for that. IRS is fine.
And the only comment I would just make is that I interpret travel as including tolls and parking. It's a broad category of expenses that are reimbursable.
I agree, and was there I forget, I'm sorry, Jason, was there a maximum amount each month? Was that included in this?
No,
Expenses are expenses.
yeah,
No, I'm sorry, in terms of meeting compensation.
10 per,
Days.
Was it 10?
10
That's
10 days.
There is,
statutorily required.
that's statutory.
Okay,
And you
Got it.
cannot have 4 meetings in one day and bill $400. It's per, you have
day.
10
It's per
meetings
day.
a day, the day compensation is
right, it's
$100.
it's per day. And I don't think I would do a limit on expenses, but I can't.
The only,
how it goes.
Well, you also have a statutory provision though, too, that says, for example, like hotels or lodging, it has to be.
Oh, there, if you'll
Consistent
see it in
with
the
the
provision, I'm
rules.
sorry, I didn't include it in the presentation, but it is in the current draft, and you'll see that in there, is that there is a requirement that your board take advantage of government and group rates
Right.
for travel and lodging when available.
Right, and well, that's what we should do, in my view.
the other item on expenses, though, when it, travel, lodging, that's pretty routine. Where meals are concerned on a per diem basis, there are some times and places where meals are reasonable. There are some other times and places where they're very different. And the question becomes, do we want to put a daily limit?
One way to handle it is to utilize the IRS per diem amount for that particular locality. So if you're in Washington DC, it's one amount. If you're in someplace else,
Right, and then
not be as expensive.
anything above that would be each of your personal responsibility.
Right.
Right. For the county, what they do is you could do a per diem day of $60 or buy a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's a different price. Just as an example.
And again, it's not here, but we discussed it in the last presentation. Any compensation that you receive under this policy, under this ordinance, would be subject to your own board, your own member agency's rules as well.
All right, do you need more direction?
No, just a closing comment.
Before you do that, let me ask if there are any questions or comments from the public on this item before we let you close. All right, here comes Bert.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this presentation. I appreciate the questions. I'd like to share some things with you. I'm sure some of you read the newspapers and you're talking about ethics training, which is important. The green light's on.
Okay, sorry.
Sure that some of you read the newspapers and ethics training is very important, but when you read the newspapers, you find out that most lawsuits are involved with sexual harassment. I would suggest you get a sexual harassment training requirement also. The second is with respect to, and I appreciate that you're going to have a limit on the lodging, possibly, and the expenses. If an individual is going to be compensated by one agency and also compensated by this agency, I don't think the idea of double dipping is a good picture to send to the president or to the people that are supporting this agency. I think you should look very closely at that. And I know that one other agency limits if there is food or dining, there's no alcoholic beverage compensated by the agency. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Bert. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all those comments, Bert, thank you. The no, alcohol is not reimbursed, I know that that's what we do. I think there were a couple of other things that you had mentioned, all of which are fine. No problem. And particularly the double dipping. I mean, if, for example, on behalf of the city, I go to a aqua conference, then the city is going to bear the responsibility for all that. If, on the other hand, there's something pertaining to Fox Canyon GMA and I'm attending that conference, then Fox Canyon would pay for it, but there'd be no double dipping.
It'd be a good idea.
The other question, the other thing is, like our airport authorities, cities can get paid at $100 to go to that meeting. And they get paid, but the city isn't paying them. So like for this here, if the city was paying you $100 to come to this meeting, the Fox Canyon would not also pay you $100 to come to this meeting.
That's correct. No, the city
That's the
doesn't.
clarity, right,
Right, it doesn't. And
Yeah, I think that would be important to add.
just to clarify.
Jason, is that for all the qualified meeting, any reimbursement for attending qualified meetings or travel or anything else paid by another agency is ineligible for
Reimbursement.
compensation from this agency.
My only concern there is how would our staff know?
Well, it would be obviously it'd be up to us. One of the things that will happen, I would think, on a periodic basis is that board members would have to submit to staff a list that these are the meetings that I attended, GMA meetings that I attended in the last month or quarter or however often that's it. And it would be, and maybe if you're going to have a reporting form that simply certifies on the bottom that none of those meetings have been compensated by any third party.
I think that's doable. That, and I believe there is a requirement in the statute, and it's been incorporated into the policy, that you guys will be required to report during your board comments, the meetings you attended, the events you attended and stuff, and you guys regularly do that now. So it shouldn't be too much of a change. Any other questions?
No?
The last thing I would just say is that this item will come back in the form of an ordinance and a policy for your board's adoption at the next meeting. We do need to notice it in the published notice of the ordinance adoption, and so we're going to be building in time for that over the next handful of weeks.
All right, thank you. Let's move on then to item number 17.
Good afternoon, Chairers, members of the board. For the record, I'm Dr. Farai Kaseke, agency staff, here to present item number 17, which is related to the Water Master Response Report to the LPV Policy Advisory Committee recommendation report on the purchase of imported water from Cayugas for basin replenishment. So as a way of background, I'll just kind of introduce this. The Los Pozos Valley adjudication judgment requires that Water Master prepare basin optimization yield study. And this study basically determines the operating yield and the ramp down rate for each water year through water year 2039, such that the sustainable yield and the operating yield are the same by 2040. Now, critical to the development of the basin optimization yield study is the basin optimization yield plan, whose purpose is to evaluate and select the basin optimization projects that are likely to be practical, reasonable, and cost-effective to implement prior to 2040 to maintain the operating yield at 40,000 acre-feet per year, or as close thereto as achievable. Now, your board adopted the initial basin optimization plan this year in June. And within that plan, there were 9 basin optimization projects that were identified. Of those 9, staff recommended implementing 5. So 5 are the ones that are recommended for implementation, meeting that criteria of cost-effective, readily implementable. And of these 5, we're just going to focus on that one, number 2, purchase of imported water from Cayugas for basin replenishment. In general, this particular recommendation report was prepared with Cayugas with input from Zone Mutual, Ventura County Water Works districts, numbers 1 and 19, and representatives from Ag and Watermaster staff had some input into preparing this memo, which then went to the PAC and was reviewed, discussed, and approved for submission to Watermaster as a PAC recommendation report. But generally what this in lieu program does is to basically offset pumping that is occurring by receiving an equal amount of in lieu water from Cayugas. And so if you're just looking at that cartoon, you bring in the in lieu deliveries from Cayugas, that means you're going to reduce your pumping. And from that basically increases your water levels for those problem areas that you have, which makes it very simple. So the recommendation report gives a very good overview of how this program would work. This is a program similar to previous in lieu programs that have worked in the area, I think 1994 to 2016. You had similar programs that kind of were occurring in that area and had levels of success. And so we know it works, and it's just a question of making adjustments to how this actual program would work. And it also provides recommendations for implementation. So one of the key differences with the previous program implementations is that you'd have agreements between Cayugas and the purveyor, obviously approved by the GMA, but in this case, this would be an agreement between Watermaster and the purveyor, such that the Watermaster pays the difference from the cost of importing Cayugas water and pumping and the associated charges there. So in general, staff basically agree with the PAC's recommendation report, but there's need for greater clarity in some sections of this, and that's kind of what I'm just going to highlight. I'm not going to go through the entire thing. Specifically how Cayugas intends to apply its administrative charges and policies. There's the capacity charge and a readiness to serve charge. The amount and rate of the capacity charge and ready to serve charges is not provided for the high and low periods. Thus, the full costs for this project will not be cannot be calculated for either period. There's also a footnote which recommends the program operate during the low demand period, but this does not include analysis of the water right holders or the basin's water demands during either the high or the low period. And so it's very difficult to determine how successful that the project would be, depending if the water right holders' demand is higher during the second period or during the summer. That's when you'd really want to see this happening. So we just need an analysis to kind of figure out exactly how that will work. And then there's also a little discrepancy on allocations held by WMIDs within United Water Conservation District, which has a direct impact on the funds raised for program implementation. These are little things that we can basically work on. However, there will be an item that will come before your board and needs to go to the PAC regarding how to treat basin optimization assessments to that group that is, does this thing have a pointer? Oh, okay. In that purple area. The Cayugas memo basically puts this at about 6,700. Staff did a similar exercise, and we're coming up about 1,200 acre feet apart. But that's something that we can always figure out and make sure that we have. So the mechanisms to account for that are basically there. I think it's something that's doable, and it's just a question of getting a little bit of clarity on the policy direction for that. So recommendations for this item are to first and foremost reserve and file this presentation, and secondly, approve the attached response report to the PAC recommendation report, and three, provide any direction to staff if your board so wishes to.
Thank you, Fry. Any comments from the board?
Fry, thanks for the presentation. Zeroing in on your staff report on page 2, the first bullet under discussion, where you're talking about a capacity charge and a readiness to serve charge that may apply to the in lieu program. The report does not describe with certainty whether and or how these charges may apply to the in lieu program. So is there any more clarity that is coming from PAC on that? And I guess sort of a corollary question is, are all of the parties that are receiving in lieu water from Cayugas already customers of Cayugas?
So the
Which have already paid capacity charge or annexation fees.
So the way that I can answer this to the best of my ability is that the two that we're specifically referring to here, Zone and Waterworks District, are already within Cayugas service area, and they can receive water from Cayugas at this point. This is something that has happened in the past.
So all of those receiving in lieu would already be pre-existing Cayugas customers?
I would like to believe so. Is that right? That's kind of my understanding
I
at this
would like
point.
to have some more clarity on that.
Okay.
Right, and there's only 6 wells that we're really talking about, and they're owned either by County Waterworks District or Zone Mutual Water Company.
Okay.
So it's limited to just those 2 parties, which we can clarify.
Okay, but I'd also like some clarity on how the charges, on how the capacity charge and RTS charges apply to the program. I'm just taking it right off the staff report.
Right, correct, and that was our concern as well, because the report that we received implied that those charges would be applicable, but lacked detail.
Yeah.
And the other thing was those charges are applied during the summer months. So the recommendation was that we accept the in lieu water during the winter, which is of course when we don't really need it. So there's some work that needs to be done there.
Well, I guess what I would ask is, before we receive and file the report, we send it back to PAC and ask them to provide some additional clarity on those points.
I think that's also the intention of this report, is update your board and really take that, get more clarification.
Well, your item 2 is for us to approve the report, and I guess I'm not ready to approve the report until I have some more clarity.
It's the response report that requests more clarity. The response report.
Oh, then I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Okay. Where is the?
It starts on page.
I apologize, Fry. Then you're on the right
17B.
track. Okay. We need more clarity. Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, I would just say, in support of this, I think this is a great program, existing infrastructure, it's very actionable. So I'm thankful, that we've come to this kind of conclusion. I just want to kind of get a little bit of clarity. I was wondering, for these people within this small region, they're being compensated or made whole so that their operating costs essentially stay the same despite taking these in lieu deliveries. And my question is, why is there kind of this carve-out provision for the basin assessment?
As has been mentioned before to your board, there is that group within the West Las Posas, the one that's in the purple in the diagram that's there. So there's a provision within the judgment that says, as a matter of equity, these guys already pay replenishment fee to United Water Conservation District. And so as a matter of equity, Watermaster may reduce the amount of basin assessments that's levied to this group within a United Water Conservation District service area. And so we don't have this is also going to depend on your board with obvious input from the PAC on how much that reduction would be, whether you want to completely waive that. That's a policy recommendation that we'll be bringing to your board that will refer to the PAC and then bring back to your board for consideration for direction on how to proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Has anyone been in contact with United to inquire whether United would be willing to pay the, I guess that, from the replenishment fees they've collected, the, I guess the assessments that would be borne by that community that's already paid them? You follow?
I think I get what you're saying.
Well, right now, one of the things that will come to us eventually is whether or not the costs, whether in making an assessment, the cost of this in lieu program is spread across all the pumpers or some smaller segment of the pumpers. And since the judgment suggests an opportunity for the board to consider a different assessment for replenishment fees for the group already paying United, it seemed to me to be a fair question, since all of the stakeholders in the basin are being asked to pay a replenishment fee as part of this program. Would United be willing to contribute some of the funds they've collected on behalf of those purple stakeholders to into this program, which would reduce the assessment for everybody else? It's a fair question. I don't know what the answer would be, but it's worth asking.
Yeah, it's a fair question. Very good one. Thank you for that. We'll reach out to United on that.
Any other questions or comments from the board before we open it up to the public? All right, hearing none, let me ask, any members of the public have any questions or comments with respect to this item? All right, hearing none, let me come back then to the board for any final thoughts and motions and ask, I guess, is there a motion to, I guess, both receive and file the presentation and approve the response report to PAC?
So moved.
There's a motion and a second? And all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion's carried. Thank you, Farai. Let's go to item number 18.
Chair West, members of the board, for the record, I'm Farai Kaseke, agency staff, bringing item 18, which is a response report to the Technical Advisory Committee's recommendation report on the Basin Optimization Yield Study numerical modeling result. So these results are preliminary. As a background, I've already mentioned the Basin Optimization Yield Study in the previous presentation. This study will determine the operating yield and in turn the rate of ramp down such that the sustainable yield and operating yield are the same by 2040. This is meant to be an iterative process, so there is an opportunity to do to do another yield study in 2030 and 2035. We're currently trying to complete the first basin optimization yield study. This slide is basically going into how we've gotten to this point. It's a discussion of the timeline. So in October of 2024, after some challenges in contracting with United to perform the modeling for the West Las Posas management area, your board directed staff and the consultant DUDAC to develop alternative modeling approaches, and we came up with 3 of those. And your board then asked us to drop one of those, and we replaced it with another alternative approach. At the January 2025 meeting, your board extended the operating yield of the basin through water year 2025. So this is an additional year. The judgment calls out for 2 years through at least water year 2024. So this is an additional year that we have that 40,000 acre feet operating yield. At the June 2025 meeting, your board adopted the basin optimization plan and also directed staff and the consultant DUDAC to use the preferred alternative modeling approach to complete the basin optimization yield study, and this is what we've done. We had PAC and TAC input, it went for consultation, and they all concurred that given the circumstances, the approach that was chosen was the best foot forward, the best available science available then. And so we plowed on and did the modeling. The preliminary modeling results were presented to the TAC in July of this year by DUDAC. And after that, we had a request for consultation with specific questions we asked the TAC to weigh in on. They had some concerns and wanted some clarity on some of the items that were presented, and so we provided a revised model output for them and a second request for consultation. And this brings us to where we are today, which is a board update. The TAC submitted their recommendation report, and in general, they gave 5 recommendation reports. Staff and DUDAC agree with 4 of those 5 recommendations that are there. I'm not going to go through all of them line by line, say that the first 4 we agreed. The 5th one, it's a 3-part recommendation. Staff agree with the first and the third part, and the part that's in blue is a part that we kind of disagree with, which is to test reduced in lieu delivery volumes for identification of cost-effective project refinement. And the reason we basically disagree with that is that, one, it's beyond the scope of the basin optimization yield study, and secondly, given the model uncertainty as a result of the updates that were made to the model itself over the flows, how the flows occur on the boundary between the east and west Las Posas, the Somis Fault. It's a bit inconsistent with the generally accepted hydrogeologic conceptual model. And so any refinement that we might try and do at this point in time, given that level of uncertainty that is there, is not going to be really helpful. So instead of trying to focus on trying to zero in on those differences, I think it'll be much better for us to then simply use other tools such as groundwater monitoring of the water levels to inform basin management and what actions we can take. And this is also a project that has existing infrastructure, so there's no need for capital expenditure to be budgeted for this, because it's basically making use of existing infrastructure. So this is basically what I've just talked about, and the TAC has already made some of the same things in recommendation 3 and in their recommendation 1, which kind of address the things that I just talked about. And with that, I would give the recommendations to your board to receive and file this presentation and approve the Water Master Response Report to the Technical Advisory Committee's recommendation report and provide direction to staff.
Thank you, Fry. Questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, questions or comments from the public on this item? And again, hearing none, returning to the board, is there a motion to approve the recommended action, including receiving and filing the presentation and approving the Water Master Response Report to TAC?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion's carried. We will recess once again into closed session. Thank you all for being here. Excuse me? We do. We're going to recess to closed session. No. So we'll adjourn from closed session. No action is anticipated.